that family is where 和, where harmony is to be pursued. Now, this idea of 和 is really very important. Again, if we look on the Jiaguwen, if we look on these ancient Chinese characters, 和 has to do with music. It has to do with 和, it has to do with food. That 和 is not, to translate it simply as harmony, is insufficient. Harmony is ratio. But this kind of harmony is ratio and or ratio. That it's an optimizing symbiosis. It's trying to get the most out of your ingredients. The strategy, the idea of using family as the governing metaphor is really very productive. Like, instead of the kind of teleology that becomes common sense coming out of the Greek tradition, that teleology, the idea that something becomes what it should be, is not part of the Chinese tradition. Instead, you have this idea of 中和, that we're not going anywhere. We didn't come from somewhere. We have a cultural tradition, but there's no end game. It's just, how do we, with this particular group of people in this particular time, get the most out of the human experience? We're not going to heaven. We're not going to somewhere else. This life here is not an effort on behalf of something that is higher and more noble. This is the life, and so how can we make the most of it? And of course, is there another life? Yes, there is another life. That this young lady, when she looks at the picture of her grandmother lives on in her. That each generation lives on in the generations that come after. You have a surname and you have a given name. The surname is the family lineage. It goes from century to century, passed on, and then your job is to make the family famous, is to lift the name of the family. This is the wisdom of the Chinese tradition, grounded in the concept of a family, that every member of the family has to make a contribution to the family, and by virtue of that contribution, the family flourishes. Everybody wins together. And so, when we try to take this tradition on its own terms, when we don't Christianize it, when we don't use the Western vocabulary of modernity to interpret the Confucian tradition, it offers us a different concept of person. In this Confucian role ethics, the alternative to this infinite games, that is the alternative to individualism, to winners and losers, you have relationally constituted gerundive concept of person. You have the idea of achieving personal identity through embodiment, through living your roles and relationships, Li and Ti, these two cognate ideas. That it's not rationality that enables you to find the best way forward. Rationality is one element in it. We need reason, but we also need our feelings. We need our bodies. And so it's imagination, shu, to put yourself in somebody else's position and try to figure out what is the best way to grow this relationship. And then finally, and this is very interesting when you talk about Judaism and Confucianism, you have a kind of atheistic religiousness. You have a family-centered religiousness. When the word religion in Latin is religare, it means to bang de很紧, means to bind tightly. To bind tightly, if you have a transcendent God, means to get close to God, to be godly. But binding tightly in the Confucian tradition is Li. It's when you, at Chunjie, at Chinese New Year, when people, the whole country, leaves the city and goes home. This is a Confucius religiousness or religiosity That it doesn't have a God, but it has a family-centered kind of religiousness where you need a Chinese vocabulary to express it. You can't use the vocabulary of Western religion to talk about China. You need a Chinese vocabulary. And so my story tonight is we have to let this Confucian tradition speak on its own terms, have its own voice in order to appreciate the contribution it has to make to the modern world. Thank you very much.